Hey, welcome back to the Obvious Choice podcast. This is Jonathan Goodman. Today I've got a special treat for you. This is an interview from the Obvious Choice Digital Summit that happened October 6th to the 8th, 2023. Now, all interviews from the summit are actually available for purchase if you like at obviouschoicesummit.com. It's $99, 100% of everything that you pay goes to support the Tyler Robinson Foundation, which provides financial support for families battling pediatric cancer. With that said, enjoy the interview. Hope that you're doing good. Welcome back. I'm here with my buddy, Andrew Coates. Andrew is the epitome of building career capital and leveraging, call it new media, social media content, not for today, but for some nebulous future that's going to be better than today. And I'm really excited to talk to him about this because him and I have had a ton of conversations about this and our approach, and I think he's doing it about as good as anybody. Andrew, I kind of define this. I wrote down a quote that, we haven't said to one another, but I feel like really kind of brings this whole conversation together. So I'll start with that, and then I want to get into a little bit about your story. So the quote that I wrote down is, do dope shit. Like a lot of people feel like they need to do dope shit online in order to do dope shit in the real world. It's actually the opposite. It starts in the real world, and then you amplify that online. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think a lot of coaches and a lot of probably the business owners, a small business owner who thinks, wow, in order to get clients, I need to have great social media. I need to grow on social media. And I actually think it's very reversed.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in the foundation of social media growth. And let's get this out of the way, because you always say this, you don't need a big social media to be successful. And that's true, right? But let's admit that for a lot of people, they want it. And I think
yes,
as a brand
we'll talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, as a brand building vehicle, which like this potential scope and leverage of having a large personal brand. Alex Hormozi talks a lot about it. You know, whether he talks about how The Rock did his tequila, or Conor McGregor, the Proper 12, et cetera, et cetera. There's a ton you can do long term. Mm-hmm. But the foundation is laid with all of the work that goes unseen, all of the coaching of the clients in front of you, all of the business development, all of the business infrastructure that you build. And you get a lot of credibility and a lot of authority if the goal is to build a larger brand by doing all those other things first. And I think a lot of people are making the mistake that, well, if I'm flashy on social media, if I go viral, it'll bring customers to my door. Right. And I don't really believe it works very well that way, or maybe quickly and superficially, but I don't believe it's a foundation for enduring success.
I mean, Conor McGregor and The Rock are able to do what they do with their product companies because they're Conor McGregor and The Rock. And part of what made them a super celebrity as opposed to all the other fighters and actors and wrestlers and stuff like that is because they're phenomenal self-promoters. And that's the same with actors as well. You think about the difference between like Kevin Hart and a lot of other actors, right? He's a phenomenal self-promoter. One of the things that Kevin Hart did coming up in the game, I don't know if you know this story, but he was the first person in Hollywood actually to go against the production companies and say, when you sign a contract with me to be in your movies, you have to pay extra to get access to my platform. He was the first person to do that. Now it's commonplace. Now it's written into contracts. Because what he did coming up in the game when he was building comedy clubs, you know what he did? He built his email list. Smart. He put a on every single chair. This is when he was busting his ass doing comedy clubs. On every single chair, he put a paper sign up form on it. And it would say something like, hey, thanks so much for coming. I'm Kevin. If you want to get notified next time I'm in your city, see my next show, get whatever these freebies, put your email down here. He built his email list from the ground up. That's one of obviously he's exceptional. But I guess the point with all of this is that these people have scaled and amplified to a great extent something that was already there. They did not create something from nothing using social media, using content.
There's something else there too. They were not beholden to the gatekeepers, in this particular case, production companies, Hollywood, et cetera. And a lot of actors and celebrities now are going outside of that and building their own systems. And it's kind of an analogy for anybody who feels like, well, I need social media, I need to rely on social media, where that that platform still is a gatekeeper, and there's all sorts of things that can change. You and I talk sometimes about what's going on with algorithms and changes to that, and the modification of
Right.
tactics, and it can become extremely time consuming just to be beholden to that and having to adjust to it. But
And
I believe,
miserable.
yeah,
And
and I
miserable. Just
believe,
ain't the life I want to live.
well, when you and I got talking originally, when and the goal was to grow your Instagram, because up to that point you did not value it. Then you decided there's value in this. We talked strategy. And one of the key points of strategy was you, Jonathan Goodman, have a tremendous amount of capital accumulated through having written all of your books,
What?
having the foundation of the Personal Trainer Development Center, the Online Trainer Academy, verifiable business success, public speaker, and relationships across the industry. And
Sure.
you're an established authority.
The work
And
I'd done in
strategy,
private for a decade.
exactly. And then,
Right.
so what I knew would happen is if we took a very clever, popular tactic, which is a text-based graphic, your name, your image on it, so that people could identify it as you, take all of the media ideas, the marketing knowledge, the training knowledge that you have accumulated across all of the media you've ever done. It's already in
Right.
your brain and written down in places. Put it in something that is highly shareable, that creates social capital for the person sharing, because like, a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, well, I want to do this thing that makes me look good, selfies, blah, blah, blah. No, no, no. It's about whoever's following you, how it makes them feel, and what they can share with their following.
Right.
You hit that one out of the park. And then there's all of these coaches and trainers who know who you are, but they weren't following you yet because you hadn't paid much attention to your media. And as soon as you started showing up at all these other stories, people are you're soaking up all these people who know who you are based on all of this legacy of work. And that's why you're
Or know
following through.
somebody who knows who I am, right? Like oh, I think I saw that guy somewhere or whatever. I mean, this is the relationship capital as well for
Yes.
years. I guess, what I always like with you is that you try everything. You're speaking, you're writing, you're creating online programs, you're hosting your own events. In addition to all the stuff that you're doing, which is not stopped or slowed down, if anything, it's grown, which is your in person business, in
All the time.
addition to the content. Jason Pfeiffer, who's also taking part in this, who's the editor in chief of Entrepreneur, talks often about how you constantly need to create your next career. And the way to do that is to fit stuff in the cracks of what you're already doing as he calls it build for tomorrow, right? As you build for the
Love his book.
future. It's a phenomenal book, and he will be talking about that. And I like Jason a lot. I'm talking to a bunch of funny short Jewish guy jokes in there as well. But I guess my question is like, do you know where this is all going for you? Right? You're
I
doing
love
all
this.
of this stuff. Do you know where it's going?
And I love this question because I didn't used to like it. I just did a presentation virtually for another event. And I talked about this in the context of, when someone asks you, what's the game, what's the long game? Like, I never knew. I never
Yeah.
had clarity on it. And I always felt uncomfortable with the question until as time went on, I realized doing all the things that I do, which are probably not necessarily efficient. They're a little disparate. I'm probably, some people would say, oh, you need to focus on a few things or one thing. But what I realized was happening, especially as social media grew and the things like writing for all the different publications, all the speaking, was that I was building a personal brand,
Yeah.
which doesn't that's an infinite game in a sense. It doesn't have hey, it's not like my 5-month vision board and my 13-month vision board.
Right.
No, I don't have any clarity on that. But what I know
Nobody
is that
does. And anybody who
as
has that vision board, it's kind of like
rubbish, it's
bullshitty. But I do think that there's something to be said for if you put a massive vision on the board, you
yeah,
probably won't hit it. You might not hit it, right? But you're going to do better than if you have no like huge audacious goal. Maybe not vision, or some huge audacious goal, or
absolutely.
whatever, right?
And
Like
I
I
make
want to
this
sell 1,000,000 copies of this book.
right.
Like
And
20 books a year sell 1,000,000 copies. Like, what are the odds of that happening? But there's a much better chance of me selling 250,000 copies of the book if I set a goal of selling 1,000,000.
and having ambitious goals, I think, is really good. What I noticed was happening was the options and the opportunities were getting more of them, and they were getting better with time.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped me realize, wait a second,
Say
I
that again.
enjoy
Say that again.
the options and
Yeah.
the opportunities that I was getting, there were more of them and they were getting better over time. Now, there's also, and this is another thing Hormozy talks about where you have to be careful about not getting distracted. I think Warren Buffett and some other really smart business thinkers talk about, making a list of the top 20 things you want to accomplish, highlighting the top five, and then
Yeah.
people ask, all right, well, how do you accomplish 6 through 20? It's like, you don't. You mercilessly avoid those things because they're not
Right.
distractions.
Yeah,
But
that's definitely not a Hormozy thing. Hormozy's really good at reiterating stuff that a lot of other people have
yes,
said over the years and
absolutely.
basically just selling it in a new way. So
Yep.
that concept is often attributed to Warren Buffett. And
Yeah.
the
But
idea is it's his prioritization principle where you write a list of the 20 things you think that you should do. You then identify the one or two that you really should do. And then you identify the next five that you think that you should do.
mhm.
And you put those next five on an absolutely do not do list because those are the ones that are good enough to feel like they're going to pull you in, but not important enough to do. Now, the funny thing, I think objectively that's a good process to do, and I've advised that to a lot of people. But somebody told Warren Buffett. So the person who told that story supposedly was the guy who flew Warren Buffett's airplane. And then somebody asked Warren Buffett about that, and he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never done that. So who knows where that came from is basically the
Well,
moral of the
everything
story.
is
But it's good
everything goes
advice.
back to Winston Churchill. Like, you can attribute all quotes to Winston Churchill or Albert Einstein anyway.
Yeah.
But back to the kind of the point, I don't think we necessarily need clarity on the
Uh,
exactness of where we're going to be. You're probably doing things now that you didn't imagine. I mean, COVID caused a lot of changes. You were in a position to benefit from it, but we talked about this before, you saw the writing on the wall knowing, okay, cool, there's this big wave and this thing's going to come crashing down and I need to pivot. You've documented how you've changed the structure of your business, right?
I
So
start the I start the book with a story, with that
like,
story.
and you put yourself in a position through everything that you've done, all of the skills, all of the relationship capital,
Yeah.
all of the career capital of accomplishment that's demonstrated through your media, and it's put you in a position to be able to pivot, adjust as you went.
Right.
And now you have the new book coming out and we're doing this project, and I mean, I'm
Well,
excited to see what the
I
future is.
want to get back to you because there is. I want to get back to you in a second, but I want to hammer on this. I was going to talk about this a little bit later on in our conversation, but we can segue to it now. It's this idea of what's next, and I think about that question a lot. I get asked about that a lot. Hey, I've had success doing this one thing. What's next? What should I do next? And what I've come to now is it's okay to not know what's next. And also, you don't need to do many things. And you don't need to rush things. You can wait for really good opportunities to come about. As you've said, there's more and more opportunities that show up every day. We have this fear that if we say no to something or turn something down, that's it. That's like a one shot. The reality of it is, it's not. It's going to happen again. But there's always going to be an in between time, isn't there? Between whatever you did before to wherever you're going next. And you don't need to know what next is, and it might not need to happen quick. You hear about Michael Lewis, who wrote, The Big Short, who wrote Moneyball, a bunch of books. His first book, I think, was called Liar's Poker. It was something like 12 years until his next book. And when he was asked about it, he's like, didn't have a good story. There's something to be said for that. So what do you do then in between? Whenever you're at a stage where you're thinking what's next and you don't have a defined answer of here's the opportunity, here's the thing I'm tackling, I'm going after, that's when you invest in your career capital. That's when you create content. That's when you get on the phone with colleagues all of the time and you support or something you do, which I want to talk to you about. You support the hell out of colleagues. Basically, what you're doing is that you don't know what's next. You're investing into your platform so that when that next thing comes, you have as much leverage as possible in terms of a distribution channel, a network, to be able to launch this thing and
Well,
make good with it.
you just described what you've been doing for years at the Personal Trainer Development Center, which was I mean, there was original content on there, but a lot of the original content was written by the coaches you were developing relationships. You also
Mhm.
curated for years the weekly best list for articles, which I used to read. And then all of a sudden, one day, I get notifications that one of my articles is on there because
Right.
of a friend, Mike Howard,
Yeah.
and got a lot of play on there over the course of the next couple of years, which actually did a lot. That was one of the earliest inflection points on my career. And here you are talking about relationship stuff. You made an impression upon me very early in this. We met in 2018. I'm a relatively unknown coach in terms of having done anything grander per se, but then we do our event here in 2019 in Edmonton. You sent me a video message congratulating me
Oh,
because
did
we
I?
did really well. And that
Cool.
stood out. And there are people who I've noticed much later on who are trying to offer me what forgive the way I'm painting this, but fairly mediocre opportunities that benefit them long
Right.
after they would have been beneficial to me. And it's not that I'm not transactional about this, but I realize that this person is now in their mind, I'm
Right.
someone that they can grab onto and go, okay, this will now benefit me. Hey, will you come and write a guest post for my blog? And what I look at is I look at who are the people. Now, I'm still making new friends. People are supporting me in really cool ways. But I also look at the people who are the people who invested and supported before any of this stuff exploded.
Right.
People like yourself, people like Dr. Mike Isertel, uh, Dean Somerset, obviously is local. I've known Dean for forever. And there's a lot of people on that list. So, but
So that
again,
gets down to what we were talking about, right?
yeah,
Like what are you investing into in those in between moments? I think if you have something you're actively working on where you have a good opportunity, that should be your focus. A big part of the obvious choice book, of the methodology, of the philosophy, of the lessons that I share in it is, hey, you should actually be working on this thing and largely ignoring the internet, right? Like content production, whatever it is. And that's just because it's often a distraction. And it's a distraction because there's so much ego involved in it. It feels good to have people follow you. It feels good to get likes and stuff. And not to say that that stuff isn't good, but it's also not necessarily what you need when you're building a business. And it often detracts from that. But in between those times, if you're not actively saying, I need customers today, that's when this concept of, hey, building a following is great, man. Getting on the phone without needing anything with somebody who may be on whatever metric you're basing this on, above you or below you, which is all just manufactured bullshit anyway. But getting on the phone with them and just being like, yo, I noticed this thing that you did cool there. Great work. Because then you might be talking to them 7 years later, like we are. And you're very much peers at that point. You never know where somebody's going to come. But if you want to be in this game for a long time, you got to invest in people and you got to invest in your own reputation as much as possible. And the more you can do that in between moments when you're not actively trying to build, the better, I think.
and it's a good opportunity to build key pieces of infrastructure, things that how many coaches and how many business owners haven't done the email list, right? And keep getting told they've heard
Yeah.
it 100 times and they're procrastinating. Guess what? If you have downtime, that might be one of the best things you could do is just get the program, sign up for whichever service you feel best, get that in, even if you don't have or any or many email lists to put on it, get it done because if it's there and ready to go when other things are growing, great. Get the website up. One of the biggest inflection points in my entire career was having a website. I wanted to write articles because the people I looked up to and aspired to be like, I suppose, wrote articles. And so I didn't have a website. I didn't possess that skill. Now, I'm big on cautioning people about using fixed language about what you can and can't do, but authentically, it wasn't going to be very efficient for me. My best friend built me a pretty serviceable website, wouldn't take any money for it. She's one of the best people in my universe, and she did that. So I started writing articles.
But
And then I was traveling to more conferences and meeting and connecting with people like Mike Howard, Lou Schuler, yourself, people who started to pay attention to my
yeah.
writing.
Mm-hmm.
Then on the podcast, so I think podcasts are wonderful for connectivity and relationships. I had Danny Sugart on my podcast.
But
And I love Danny's stuff and reading it for years with T Nation. And then because I was already writing, when we invited Danny to come on the old podcast, she said yes, she was excited. She started looking into my media. And a few weeks after, she asked me to come contribute to T Nation. And then that was the next big inflection point that blew things up because I was building the infrastructure and having it in
So
place before I was ready to even know what to do with it.
let me bring this back a little bit.
Yeah.
The esteemed Notorious B.I.G. once said, "More money, more problems." Well, a lot of folks out there are saying, if I only got followers, if I could only go viral. Well, here's what happens: more followers, more problems. Oftentimes, people who are able to build a following very, very quickly, which can happen, you hit it, you go viral, it can happen. Two things happen. One is they have no idea how to deal with the pressures of having more eyeballs on you. The things people say, the nasty things people say, the demands on you, the requests of you from people who now want stuff from you. Like, it's much easier to kind of ease into that over time and figure it out. But the second is when that happens, you need to have this infrastructure created beforehand to absorb it. And that's what you're talking about, isn't it?
Yep.
Because you had this infrastructure, when you caught these lucky breaks as a result of doing the right things day in and day out, you were in that position to absorb it and make the most of it. And that's the highlight of what I want to kind of get at there is, yeah, you're right. Building
And
the
I can,
infrastructure is important. You can more or less guarantee good luck by taking the right activities day in, day out. But when that good luck happens, which you won't be able to really know, what are you going to do? Right? Do you know? Because most of the time it's like, yeah, I went viral. 2 days later, it's gone. And now you have 20,000 more followers, and some of them are racist bigots. And what are you going to do?
I'll give you an example. Back in 2017 on Instagram, the infographic became the big thing, right? That was the big thing. It blew up. And a handful
Right.
of people rode that wave. And three of them particularly stand out: Spencer Nadolski, Sohee Lee, and Jordan Syatt. And they stand out because these are already people who had recognizable authority. They had done a lot. Spencer already had a book written, and they've written a lot of articles, well connected in the industry,
Right.
educators.
Right.
And so they got on that trend early. They blew up very, very large followings relatively quickly, and they were actually in a position to leverage it and capitalize it. I remember other individuals who also rode the wave, who hadn't built any of this extra stuff, hadn't had the tenure, and they went viral, they blew up, but they didn't capitalize on it or turn it into the same level of legacy brand that they've been able to. I mean, look at what Jordan Syatt has done with his brand in the wake of all that, right?
Right.
He's got a book, he's got a big mentorship, he's got one of the most popular podcasts out there. And so, like we're talking about, I really do think that if you have the bandwidth, build this infrastructure.
I agree. I mean, I also think there's something to be said for outliers, which is, I mean, literally lesson one of the book is there's a survivorship bias in there, which is we're talking about these people because they did well. Did they do well because of that thing that they did, or did they do well because somebody had to do well and they took the right steps, but so did other people? But does that mean that those are the only steps that somebody could have taken? There were a lot of other people who built great businesses in that time who didn't create infographics, and so I agree, but I think that there's a lot more to that story. I want to change gears a little bit here. Tell me who Larry is.
Larry Reed is a 73-year-old client of mine.
Okay.
He's a widower. He took care of an ailing wife for several years until she finally died. I think it was about 6 to 7 years ago. His lifelong love partner. And then he was not in a great place for a while, but he started coming out of it and wanted to get healthy. Larry's short. He's very, very, we'll cut the shit, see the videos of him. He's a heavy guy. He's overweight.
Sure.
But he had a family friend who was a young trainer, who was someone who actually got in the industry because he was influenced by me. He would be around me in the old gym. So this young man trained him for a couple of years, got him started. But then the stuff happened. Larry stopped training for a little bit. And by the time Larry was ready to come back, this young man left the industry. So when Larry was ready to come back, this young man remembered, of course, I was the obvious choice to refer him to.
Hmm.
And we hit it off. He started training with me. And he's strong. He is ridiculously strong, especially for a gentleman of his age. His top trap bar deadlift ever is a 480 pound. He can
Right.
squat 250 pounds to parallel with a safety bar. He can carry 150 pounds per hand across our 18-meter turf. And I put a lot of video of him up on my social media because I think he's an inspiration. Like he's completely exceptional within his age demographic. And therefore, you get people half or even a third of his age looking at this going, I want to be like that when I get older,
Right.
or God, if he's doing that, I really need to up my game.
Where do you get your content from then?
From, as you alluded to, I still coach full time. Okay.
Yeah.
So my content comes from things that my clients say, questions that we answer, stuff that I do in training. If I've virtually all of my training articles for T Nation are things that I have implemented in
Right.
practice. I wrote something recently for Kabuki Strength. It was on cross education, all of the research on training with an immobilized limb, because I've trained clients with torn biceps
Mhm.
and broken ankles and broken wrists and all sorts of other stuff. So I've had to work this stuff together to make it work for them.
Sure.
Turns out there's all this great research. So guess what? A lot of coaches know about this, but there's no one resource that has all the programming and everything pulled into one place. So I built it, right? This is where this comes from the practical experience.
From the practical experience, from the stuff that you're doing every day. This is the point that I wanted to bring up. This is to me what makes your material stand out in a sea of a lot of people saying the same thing, whatever industry you're in, if you're listening to this. Right, the fitness industry is not that much different from your industry. There's only a few things that you can really say, and a lot of people are saying it. What makes something stand out is how real it sounds, how much that person sounds like they get you or they get it. It's very hard to fabricate that when you're sitting at home or you're sitting in a coffee shop with a notebook and you're saying, what can I make people like today?
Ben,
And this comes from the stuff people say to you, right? When you're actively doing the thing, doesn't it?
Ben Bruno has a quote he had up on his Instagram a while ago. And whenever he reads something that a trainer has written, an article about training, he can tell who's really coaching people and
Yeah.
who's not. Because the real coaches are keeping it simple and actionable. It's practical. And then the ones who probably aren't really coaching people, it's excessively creative and not at all practical, which is, again, a lot of the stuff that we see, the circus stuff on social media. It's because someone's being, and it's okay to be entertaining to a point, but if you're pawning it off as if this is the best thing ever for your clients,
But
people, it's not practical or useful.
well, you're highlighting the difference between what I think are two distinctly different people. One of them is very clearly an experienced expert in that thing, right? They've done the thing or they're actively doing the thing. Like you don't have to be actively doing the thing right now, I think, to be able to create good content, but you need to have really done the thing for long enough to understand the thing and to understand the nuances and to have stories to tell and to put your head in the head of somebody that's going through that journey, right? Versus, hey, I'm 20 years old and I've decided I don't really want to work, so I'm just going to create content online and somehow question mark, question mark, question mark, I'm going to be able to make money. But the second group, right, are people who just become really good about entertaining around an idea. And that is the divide. And I don't think either of them are necessarily better or worse because I think that they both have their place. I think that there is a place for entertainers. I think that there's a place for, call it educators. I'll call it thought leaders. Like to become a valuable thought leader in an industry means that somebody will actively look at you and say they clearly have a level of knowledge in that thing that's worth learning from. Versus, oh, they're kind of just funny or like nice to look at. My literary agent told me that it used to be like 4 or 5 years ago, basically anybody who had a couple 100,000 followers on social media would get a good book deal. Publishing companies would give them a few $100,000, right, to write a book. And then they just got burned so many times that it's not that they ignore social media following, but it's pretty far down the list of what they look at as important. The most important thing is, do you have a history of selling things to people, particularly selling things that show that people look at you like some sort of an expert? So largely that's information, like a past history of selling books, obviously. But like if you're just like if you just sold like a bunch of t-shirts, it doesn't really count, if that makes sense. And that's what they look for now, because they know that these entertainers online, they're great at entertaining, right? They're great at advertising, but nobody really sees a lot of value in that beyond it's fun to look at for 7 seconds when we're on the toilet.
The value part's big. You highlighted a book called Snow Leopard, which is a great
So
book
good.
about writing
So
recently. One
good.
of my favorites, Luca Hocevar, who I know is part of this too, he picked up on it from my story.
Mm.
And it explains
One of
one
the most
aspect.
underrated books about content and brand development ever.
Unbelievable book.
Yeah.
And there's a section where they talk about which book categories do well. And the one
Hmm.
that does the least well is the one that's branded around the individual, about the individual.
Yeah.
And this is kind of goes to this. So I really do believe that it's entirely about how you make people feel, right? And if you make people feel there's value because there's wisdom, lessons, this goes into the authority and the credibility side, which is what you
Right.
tap into with your books, right? You do this exceptionally well. Whereas with the entertainment side of things, you're still making people feel a certain way and there's still value in that. But for the most part, if that person turns around and is trying to trade off of who they are, all of a sudden the audience doesn't really care. There are these instances where people who blew up very large, rapid TikTok followings, massive TikTok followings, because entertaining, but the way people consume TikTok is very rapid. It's about how they feel. And then I think there were as an instance where a young woman, massive TikTok following, had an appearance. She announced an appearance somewhere and no one showed up
Yeah.
because they didn't care about her. They cared about
Right.
how it made them feel.
The
So
the famous example of this is oh god, what's that musician? She's I mean, she's now not super young, but she came up when she was like 15, 16 years old, and like one of the best selling artists of all time. Like she blew away the record of most Grammy wins and stuff like that. And she came out with a book and sold like 5,000 copies.
that's exactly it.
It's
And
just people look at you and look for something from you and not something else from you. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you can't kind of abuse those rules and muddy those intersections, can you?
and it's I always had an aversion to books with the author's picture on the cover, and I never understood why. I just
Oh,
didn't
that's
like it.
interesting.
I even posted about that on social media years ago,
Hmm.
and it was something very off-putting to me. And I understand it now through the lens of what they said on Snow Leopard, because it makes it about the person
Yeah.
and selling off of that person versus making it about the lessons, the wisdom, what I get out of it, right? And
Right.
unless it's a quote super celebrity like an Arnold Schwarzenegger reading his book like Total Recall, or
Sure.
there, because like
Whether
reading,
life is inherently and objectively interesting and full of lessons,
yeah,
but there's very few people like that, isn't there?
Abe Lincoln, Winston Churchill,
Sure.
Gandhi, a handful of Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., etc. Right, like
Right.
that level of stuff,
If you're
or
those people listening, this isn't for you.
yeah, exactly, right.
Turn off. Any of those people still alive? Most of them. No, no, I don't think any of them are. Okay. Well, then this is probably for you if you're listening. Uh, well, so this came up actually last week. Last week I met with all these publishing companies that are uh, will be bidding for the rights to the book, and it's a very interesting. It's the first time that I've gone through it because this is the first time I'm traditionally publishing a book. Right? It's a very interesting conversation with them. They've seen the proposal, and the proposal is like 80 pages long. So they have a very good idea of what this thing is, and they put their hand up and basically said, "Yeah, we want it. Like, we'd love to talk to John." And so I'm talking to them, and it's a very interesting thing where it kind of goes back and forth between who's selling to who. Like I'm selling to them because they're ultimately the ones that are going to pay me a bunch of money for the book, but they're also selling themselves to me because they know that there's going to be multiple offers on it, and some of them might be close. And at the end of it, so I asked them about, any editing notes based off of the proposal and stuff. And for the most part, I was aligned. But one of the companies, based off of their editing notes and also stuff that I know that they do with their authors and that, immediately I was like, it actually doesn't really matter how much money they offer me. I'm not going to go with this company. And their editing note was almost solely surrounding, we need to make this about you and your journey. I'm like, that's not it, man. And that's why the books that your company produces are all flash in the pants. You try to find some celebrity who has some big market, has a big audience. You're good at marketing yourself, and you basically make it about them, but it's not really that much substance in the book. And so they're just continually pumping out these things that are selling 30 or 40 or 50 or even 80, 100,000 copies because this person is quote unquote famous in this little circle. And then 2 weeks later, nobody cares about it because the book was never anything.
I'll illustrate this point with something. So, having a podcast for so long,
Yeah.
I do get a lot of messages where people say, "Hey, I want to talk to," and sometimes there are people I don't even know who they are. We have no relationship, but sometimes we do. Hey, I want to talk to you about coming on your podcast. I've got a really great story. And my thought has always been in my brain, which I never ever say, is like, no one gives a shit about your story.
Yeah.
And I had Eb Samuel, who's the fitness director in
Yep.
Men's Health,
He's
on my
great.
podcast recently. And he said the same quote because he's always getting pitched. Every influencer
Mm-hmm.
wants to be in Men's Health magazine. And so they message him and they're like, hey, I got this really great story. Like, how do I get into your publication? And Eb is more blunt than I am. And he's like, no one gives a shit about your story. It again comes back to how you need to approach all of your media. It's how does it make the person feel? What kind of value does it create for them?
Yeah.
And for the person who wants to get published, what are you creating? What do you have as a resource that is valuable to the publisher, which is valuable to the publisher's audience? And
Right.
that's the fundamental of it all.
Yeah, I mean, how does whatever you're saying help somebody else become the type of person they want to become or take the next step? You don't need to do that much, especially in front facing, like superficial content. You need to help people take one step forward, give them belief in an area where they may have failed in that area before. Oftentimes, that's the best thing that you can do with a piece of content is not actually solve a problem, give people some sort of a belief that this problem can be solved because they've often tried and either succeeded or relapsed or tried and failed in the past. I mean, let's talk about a little bit. There's a few more things I kind of want to hit on with you. One is how to deal with the day-to-day fluctuations in attention, in response to content, in call it algorithmic changes, whether that's an actual thing or whether you're just like more interesting or less interesting on any given day. I don't really know. Everybody blames the algorithm. Like, I think that I've been shadow banned. It's like, no, I think you're just not interesting today is what it is. But it's still, how do you deal with that? Like, I put up a post today that is like 400, 500 likes. You probably get, 1,000, 1,500. That same post, I put it up 8 or 9 months ago, had 90,000. Same content. How do you deal with this?
So there are a handful of things. I mean, first of all, you have to zoom out, right? You have to detach an emotional response from the specific result of what you're doing. It's an analogy for the business owner doing the daily tasks in their business to build their business. It's the person starting out in the fitness journey who is struggling because, oh, I didn't lose any weight this week, despite the fact that I ate healthy and I worked out. You have to zoom out and look at, all right, what's the trend? What's the overall pattern? So that's
Yeah.
part one. Two is you have to learn from it. You have to gather data and information. Okay, this post didn't work. Why? Okay, let's look at the way it was written. There are certain things that I pick up.
What does not working mean, though? Let's take that back a step.
Well,
How it didn't work.
in
It
the
didn't
in
work
the
in terms of what?
context of if the goal is to have the post be seen by more people, engage with more people, because you're
Is
right.
that the goal?
You're alluding to, so that aligns with brand development as a whole.
Yeah.
And attention is a very, very valuable resource right now. It may be the most important resource of all, right? So if we want to have attention and build attention, because that's aligned with the brand goal, the development of capital, because attention and media following is a type of career capital. I just don't think it's the one you start with, right? I think it's the one that you build concurrently or after you get the fundamentals done. So
Hmm.
you want to still learn from it. Now, there's also something that you do is some of your posts are meant to create deeper engagement with maybe a smaller number of people. As long as you are in fact doing that well, that's important. Now, there's something bigger here as well. And this is
But
something
how do
that,
you measure that? That's the part that I have a really hard time with, because
and
the
it's not that
data
you,
that Instagram shows you
yeah,
is data specifically chosen to become famous on Instagram. Most people using Instagram are not using Instagram to become famous on Instagram. They're using Instagram because they believe it is a way to achieve some sort of a business end. And as a result, the data, the engagement insights actually often don't really align that well. So
often.
how do you
I still think
right?
you have to look at the platform and understand if you want to be on the platform to get what these other purposes are, you probably still have to a degree, play the game. So you have to understand, give the algorithm what it wants. What does it
Hmm.
want? It wants people to stay on the platform. In order for people to stay on the platform, you have to have better watch time on your video. You have to have more people spend more time reading your captions. They have to share and otherwise engage with, comment on your stuff.
Right.
And a total absence of that is an indication that the post didn't perform within what the algorithm wants. And you have two choices. You could be like, like Principal Skinner. It's like, no, it's the children who are wrong. It's Instagram. It's wrong, and you can be stubborn in the face of that, or you can go, okay, cool. I probably have to learn from this, and I probably have to give the algorithm what it wants so I can get what I need out of it. And that depends entirely on what someone's goal is. So that I think you have to take into consideration, right? There's also something else that it's a little, and I'll let you come back where you'll steer me really well. But there's
Well, I don't
something
even
about,
know. I don't even know what I think about this. Right? This is what I struggle with. Is I do think that there really needs to be a better way to measure success on social media. I think we all need to have individual metrics that we base the success of our content on, based off of our goals, not the goals of some privatized for-profit social media company, because there's a misalignment in goals. Their goals are to sell more ads. They sell more ads if people spend much more time on that platform. My guess is your goal is to spend as little as time as fucking possible to build your business on that platform. That is a distinct misalignment between those two goals. Neither goal is good or bad or better or worse, but they're very much misaligned. And their data, their insights, if we're talking about Instagram specifically, they call them insights, are aligned with their goals. So, how do we then set some sort of metrics framework? And this is what I struggle with, for saying this didn't meet the engagement metrics to quote unquote be successful there, but it met my metrics. What was the conversation we had yesterday on our Instagram messages? I told you that you having like a lot of growth right now with some stuff that you're doing, which is wonderful in terms of follower count and engagement. I'm not. I'm basically stuck at the follower count, but our business is better than it's ever been.
and there's an element of you have been clever enough. Again, it goes back to having built all the other infrastructure. You've been very clever at using social media to grow and get eyeballs on you, but also then port those people over to podcast listeners, email
Yeah.
subscribers, etc.
For me,
And
it's
I
podcast and email. Yeah.
and I think that's probably the metric that you're looking for. Because if you are seeing all of these other things doing well, then social media, it probably it's done its job. Now the next thing is, in should you want to, and this is going to be more of a superficial answer,
Yeah.
turn around and leverage social media for greater driving things into it, then it becomes some of the specific tactics. And there's some stuff that I study and I help people with. For example, a lot of video gets put up, right? A lot of video. People blow out a lot of video. And I recently analyzed an account for a guy who 50-ish thousand followers, but effectively
Yeah.
dead engagement. I mean, he was
Right.
effectively shadow banned. And my first suspicion was, and I
Did he
pushed
buy
him on it.
a?
I asked him, was like, did you buy your
Yeah.
followers? And he swore up and down. And I looked enough to see other past stuff to see that was better. And what he was doing and this is very in the weeds tactical, but I'm actually going to recommend people don't do this. It's common to take video of podcasts where you're sitting in the same position all the time, put the captions over it, grainy video, and keep pumping them out. And what ultimately happens is it looks the same to everybody, so they just like scroll past and
Yeah.
they gloss it over. If you're going to do the caption based thing, there are some accounts that James Smith is great at this. Different setting, does something different, and he's established a relationship and he's trained his audience to actually interact with his video based content. Your audience was trained to interact with text based posts because those posts, your brand is on it, but it's about the post and it's about how the person feels.
Right.
And when one of the reasons why I actually don't do much video is because I believe that if I drop video in there, one, it would be far more time consuming for me to build it. It's inefficient. And two, I don't think my audience would actually, they're not trained to respond to a lot of video based stuff where I'm more visible. But anyway, that's in the weeds. So I don't.
So what was happening? How did this person then get 50,000 followers?
So
Did
I
they just
don't.
have one or two things that popped
I
off?
don't quite know. I looked at Social Blade, which is a site that you can tell whether or not someone based just odd patterns of social media growth, whether they bought all their followers. Like, all of a sudden they got 50,000 in a week and then they're losing 200 a day, right? That's a red flag.
Right.
And that's a status. This is something I talk about a lot of the media. Be careful about falling into playing status games. That's a big trap when it comes to social media. People seek the status versus the credibility and the authority, which I think is much more enduring and more valuable. And humans are wired to perceive status. It's an evolutionary thing for survival and procreation. Like we're pattern recognition machines when it comes to status. However, it's maladaptive when we start doing dumb shit like buying followers on social media. Now, this guy, it was real, but what I had to do is I had to get him away from the tactic that the algorithm, people were ignoring. The algorithm was saying your content is garbage. It's not showing it to anybody.
Yeah.
And I got him to do more text-based stuff, and his videos broken up to be more fun, more nuanced, more individual, and his social media engagement started growing again. Right? It was just identifying what is the thing that the algorithm decides this is crap because no one is interacting with it. And if no one is interacting with it, doesn't matter what it's doing, it's not serving the time you're putting into creating it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So let's go back then to like what are you trying to get out of this thing? Is this person creating these videos because I'm guessing it's a he?
Yeah.
Is it a he? So is this person creating these videos because he wants to get famous at videos on Instagram, or is he creating videos because of some sort of a means to a business end, get customers for something?
Driving people to his podcast and ultimately driving customers. Here's the problem. If you're doing
Sounds
this,
like a very muddy path.
Perhaps, and I think potentially so. If you're getting no engagement, it's not necessarily a very good way to do it. I think people have this idea, okay, throw up as much content as possible, hoping something sticks, which is what Reels sort of was doing to reward people. Except if you just keep throwing up stuff that you're not learning from, you're not getting better, and the quality is poor because it's efficient to just, hey, let's take the video from this podcast and let's have some kid cut it up into pieces, put captions on it for $20 a reel, and then throw them up. Guess what? You're actually going to tank your own. It's not a good strategy, even though it feels like an efficient one. You're way better off investing a bit more time, a bit more effort in making really good, bloody videos and using less of them. That will get more engagement, right? We're really in the weeds here on this stuff, but as a strategy, people will just do more of something that doesn't work and not learn from it. The important thing is learn from what's going on, learn from the data, even if the data is not the best metric for what your true goals are. It's the metric that will help you with the specifics of.
Shouldn't the metric be like customer interactions?
Well, absolutely.
Like if that's your stated goal in using it, like I am creating content because I want to get customers. Right. You might have a secondary, like, okay, I'm also building for the future. And I think that that's fine, but I think you need to understand what's primary and what's secondary, because I don't think that you can do those two things really well at the same time. I think once you are like one of the reasons why you're able to do so well with the content is like you're full with customers from your training.
Yep,
because
absolutely.
You're an exceptional trainer. And so you don't have to worry about getting clients. I hear all the time from, if we're talking about personal trainers, I hear all the time from trainers. They're like, hey, what should I post on Instagram to get clients? I'm like, how many clients do you have? They're like, oh, I had one, but they dropped off. I'm like, Y'all shouldn't be posting anything on Instagram. You should be knocking on doors around the corner from you. Why are you trying to impress people you've never met somewhere around the world? Because you have 0 customers and you need 5. Like,
I
if you're full with customers, that's a different conversation. Or if you
I
have
told
enough or whatever, right?
I told 2 trainers this week to go read Getting Clients and Referrals, your book, because that's what they needed, not to mess around on social media, right? That
It's
was going
just,
to help them so much more.
well, so it's okay. It's okay as a secondary goal, or it's okay if it's like an in between, right? Like I did well in this thing. That's where I was the last couple of years. I was in between. I did well to the point where I don't really need to like worry about stuff anymore. And I was looking for my next thing. This book is now the next thing. I didn't know that at the time, but I knew that whatever that next thing was, I needed to build a launch pad for it. And so dove into social media and content. Well, now that I have my next thing, I'm actually spending a lot less time on social media and content. And I'm spending more time on this thing specifically. This summit is a good example of that. And so that's why I'm so interested and engaged with this topic, is because I just hate to see people working really, really hard and not getting anywhere with it. And I can tell you, man, we have a minimum of 200 conversations a day in my DMs. We had one day last week, we had 1,500 conversations in my DMs in one day. And overwhelmingly, I mean, I don't know what the percentage is. I don't want to figure this out because it would make me even more sad. Overwhelmingly, the burnout, the frustration, the fatigue from people who are working so hard on things that they think they should be doing, almost always centered around frustrations around content and social media, and it not getting them anywhere. And their questions are all, hey, can you look at my account? What can I do better? And I look at their account, I'm like, it's fine. It's good. It's good enough. Like that's not gonna solve your problem right now. Your problem is you make less than $1,000 a month, which means that you can't pay your mortgage or feed your family. Like, you should not be stressing about pointing at words in space matching up to trending music right now. Like, that is how abusive these engagement metrics are and how much they're distracting us from what matters. And not that they're bad or good or either, they're just different.
I think there's where people are misled to think that that's the stuff they need to do to get engagement. Keep in mind, you and I have both done really well with text-based graphics of basic pieces of wisdom and knowledge and stories and experience that resonate with people. And you hit on the big thing, the DMs. There's your metric. Are you
Yeah.
having, and there are ways to create meaningful conversations. Right now, here's a little thing. Take, for anybody who wants to do more with their social media, take a look at, first of all, there are ways, if you want to message me on social media, I will literally tell you how to do this, but you can look at your mentions and your notifications of
Mm-hmm.
every live share of a post that you didn't get tagged in. Send those people a message, thank them, send them a voice or video message. If you don't have a lot of followers, this is not going to be time consuming. Send them these things, be a real person, start conversations. Take every person who's commented on your posts in the last 30 days, look if you've ever had a DM interaction with them. If you haven't, send them a voice message or a video message, say, thank you for interacting with my stuff. Do not sell. Just
Yeah.
open the door to answering questions. If you run out of those, take a look at everybody who's liked your posts.
Right.
See if you've had engagement. Send them a DM, open door. Start DM conversations.
Start DM conversations and also try to get as many inbound. So you're talking about outbound DM conversations,
Yep.
which I agree with can be quite useful. The only issue with that is you're kind of capped at like 15, 20 a day before Instagram starts blocking you from having those.
Well,
If you are the one, the difference is if you are the one who initiates the conversation versus they're the one who initiates the conversation. If somebody else initiates conversation, you can have thousands a day. If you initiate the conversation, you can't initiate more than 15 or 20.
only if you're using the tactic I showed you originally, which
Yeah.
has a limit, which is looking at the view story shares. But we're getting into the weeds again. I
Well, so
love
so here's what we're doing right now. Here's what we did last week. I said we had 1,500 conversations last week. So, my page has 180 some thousand followers, right? Most stories that I put up on Instagram, most people on Instagram in stories get like what, a 2 to 5% reach, right? Um, so most stories that I put up will get 5,000, 10,000 reach.
Good.
This one that we put up had over 50,000 reach and had over 1,500 responses to that one story. And then we had like hundreds more responses that were basically about it, just went in direct response to the story. And it was a single slide that promoted a podcast episode. And I said, the slide says, raising prices is both scary and necessary. Inflation was 7% last year. Your prices have to go up. I just recorded a podcast telling you exactly how to do it painlessly. If you reply to this message with the words price raise, I'll send you two things. One, the link to listen. Two, the bonus PDF of the exact script I share in the episode. And so, how do you promote like a podcast episode? You could say, hey, listen to this podcast. It's going to get no reach, nothing like that. Instead, we created like the script that I talk about in the episode is like 120 words long. Like it's just a basic letter for price raise, but it's useful and it's a reason for them to reach out. And then the nice thing is, right after, so we send them that right when they respond, and then we'll say, hey, so you thinking about raising prices? Yeah, I haven't done it for a while. Cool. What are you trying to accomplish? What are your goals? And now we're in a consultative DM conversation. We've booked over 50 calls already from that one thing, and we're still booking calls. We'll book hundreds from that. It's just a matter of getting through them for our program, in addition to giving people value, in addition to sending people from social media to the podcast.
Right? Absolutely. Invite people to message you. Don't post links. Get
Yeah.
people to ask you for the links to something. Yep. It boosts instead of suppresses engagement. Absolutely.
So this was fun. Anything else you want to add? We spoke about the importance of doing dope shit in real life and then amplifying it online. We talked about the importance of still actively doing stuff day to day and then using that to create content with your client, Larry, with the stuff that your clients are saying. That's where a lot of the content comes out. And then we spoke about, which I think is probably the biggest take home from our conversation, which was super fun, is like this idea of what's next and do you have to know? And in between the next thing from the past thing, you don't need to know what that is right now. But in all of that time, basically, if you're not actively working on something right now, work on your personal brand, on your career capital, on your reputation, on your network. And then when you're actively working on something, you don't need to stress, I don't think about those things as much. But then there's going to be another in between, and you kind of leapfrog it that way. Is there anything you want to add to this, Andrew, before
Simple
we
lens
sign
to
off?
look at it through. Every time you're thinking about why you're doing something, I like to focus on being of service to people. If you find that you're doing something because you're seeking status, because you think that that status will benefit you financially or attention wise, what have you,
Yeah.
redirect the activity into being of service. I promise you, you will achieve much more status. In fact, all of the high status individuals in the industry, verifiably high status individuals, built it because they were of service, they built infrastructure, and they were patient. They had the ability to delay gratification over a longer period of time. That's the best advice I can give you guys.
Andrew, thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate you.
This is fun. Talk to you soon, man.